Good morning, everybody. Advocate Sibeb.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioner Musi. Today we're ready to lead the evidence of the former President, Mr. Thabo Mbeki. And I beg leave that he be sworn in.
The evidence you are about to give is the truth and the whole truth. So raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
Thank you.
Chair and Commissioner Musi, before we deal with the evidence of the former President, there is one housekeeping matter I would like to deal with. And this relates to a document that inadvertently slipped into the statement during the course of photocopying the statement. That is a document which is dated Wednesday, 6 August 2008. It is a Hansard recording of certain parliamentary proceedings in which the former president was responding to certain questions put to him in Parliament. It was never the intention of the evidence leaders nor the team representing the former president to have this as part of the statement. And to the extent that it has become part, we would beg leave for that to be removed from the statement.
Thank you. I have seen that, and I was wondering what that document wants in the bundle. And clearly, if you read the statement, that document doesn't form part of that statement. So I don't think that should be a problem.
Your observation is correct, Chair, and we are indebted to the Chair. Mr. Mbeki, during the course of giving evidence, you are required to speak into the microphone, and for purposes of facilitating the proper record, it is required that one person speaks into the mic at the time. You will see that every time I ask a question, my mic will be on, at the conclusion of which I will switch it off, and when you respond, you just press the mic to facilitate the recording. Now, having dealt with those housekeeping matters, it is correct that on the let's see. On the 16th of July, you signed a statement. Do you confirm that?
Yes, and I confirm that.
You have been furnished with a copy of your statement, and if you turn to page 4 of the statement, there is a signature that appears there. Will you confirm that is your signature?
Yes, it is, Chairperson.
Now, as I pointed out, the statement is made up of 4 pages, which deal with the issues you intend to assist the Commission with, especially in relation to the role you played, either as Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa or as President of the Republic of South Africa in relation to the acquisition of the special defense packages. Is that correct?
Yes.
I ask you to have regard to paragraph 1 of your statement, where you state the capacity in which you would be giving evidence before the Commission. Now, I suppose the commissioners can take judicial notice of the fact that in 1994, you were appointed as one of the deputy presidents of the Republic of South Africa. You confirm that?
Yes, that is correct, commissioners.
You served in that position up to the middle of 1999, is that correct?
That is also correct.
After the elections in 1999, you were then elected as the President of the Republic of South Africa, is that correct?
That is also correct, Commissioners.
Now, evidence has been tendered before the Commission, starting with, among others, former Minister Alec Erwin, Minister Lekota, and subsequently former Minister Manuel, with regard to the existence of a formation referred to as the Inter-Ministerial Committee, also known as the IMC, which was a subcommittee of Cabinet. Do you confirm that?
Yes, indeed, I would confirm that.
And in terms of the evidence before the Commission, you were the chairperson of that Inter-Ministerial Committee.
That is correct, Commissioners.
Now, in terms of the role you played as the chairperson of that committee, are you able to just briefly describe to the commissioners exactly what your position entailed as chairperson of the Inter-Ministerial Committee?
Well, Commissioners, as chair, one had to chair. One had to chair the committee, and really it's a supervisory sort of role with the detailed work with regard to that whole package, with the detailed work being done at the ministerial level. So the responsibility of the chair in that case would be to make sure that we meet as a committee, that we address the matter of that procurement in the context of what might have been decided as to what it is that we wanted to achieve, and then to ensure that the necessary reports were given to Cabinet. Thanks.
The various former ministers who have given evidence before this commission, before you, have given evidence with regard to the role that this IMC, or the Interministerial Committee, or the subcommittee of Cabinet, as you wish, played, inter alia being to provide executive oversight over the acquisition process of the special defense packages. Now, as far as you recall, could you just briefly state, although I may point out that this has already, evidence to that effect has already been presented to the Commission, but in your role as the chairperson of this subcommittee, could you just briefly explain the sequence of events that led to the decisions that were ultimately taken to procure?
Can I just ask members of the media to not to try and interrupt our proceedings, please? I see them walking up and down, and also try in the process also distracting the former deputy president when he's testifying. Can we just make sure that there's no up and down movements when the witness testifies?
Thank you, Chair, and I beg your pardon, Mr. President. May I seek permission? I know you no longer President. May I refer you to you as Mr. President?
Well, if that does not violate any protocol or law or values or something, I'm sure commissioners, you can call me anything. Thanks.
Yes, for purposes of these proceedings, I shall refer to you as Mr. President. Now, I was in the process when I was interrupted to ask you to just briefly describe the sequence of events that culminated in the decision ultimately to procure the SDPs as they are referred to, starting perhaps with the rationale, therefore, as provided for in the Constitution.
Well, the commissioners, of course, I can only state this matter very broadly. We're talking about events that took place more than 16 years ago. There was an obligation on government arising out of what the Constitution says about the need to have a defense force which would carry out various tasks in terms of protecting the country, etc. So there was that requirement. In any case, the government was aware of the fact that National Defense Force it needed re-equipping in any case. When we came into government, the then government, it came into government in 1994, the then government had was on the verge of signing a contract to buy 4 corvettes. We discussed that matter and said that it would be wrong to approach the matter of these acquisitions in a piecemeal manner. That what would be necessary is that we have a complete look at all the needs of the National Defense Force, so that then we are better able to decide what to do with obviously what would be limited resources, what you would spend for each of the services, whether it's the Army or the Air Force or the Navy or the medical services and so on. So I'm saying that there were these 2 considerations, the constitutional one and the reality that we knew that National Defense Force required re-equipping. As a consequence of which then it was decided that we should, Minister of Defense should prepare this defense white paper, which was done, and commissioners, as you are aware, the white papers are a government policy, not departmental. They might be put out by particular ministries. So we discussed the white paper and agreed in cabinet, so it went forward and discussed in parliament, and as again you would recall, it talked about the need for a defense review, which again was done, which then decided all these things about force structure and so on. So that was the process. And once we had completed that, and there was indeed the overall view in the country, including in Parliament, unanimously in Parliament, that indeed we needed re-equipping the Defense Force in the manner that was visualized, we then proceeded to go ahead with the procurement process. Thanks.
And it is so that this procurement process was preceded by a further step that was taken subsequent to the adoption of the Defense White Paper, which is referred to as the Defense Review. And it is during that process where the views of the public in general were obtained. Do you confirm that?
Yes, Commissioner, with regard to that, I would say that we were sensitive to the fact that there's a particular history that attaches to the armed forces here, in that the SADF, South African Defense Force, was part of the forces of repression. It was part of what the apartheid regime used in order to suppress the struggle here. So we're sensitive to the fact that it was necessary in a democratic South Africa to reposition the National Defense Force in the eyes of the people of the country. And of course it also had this other negative experience with regard to the region, the SADF had been a big source of instability in the region. Lots of people killed and destroyed and so on. So we thought it was important that the population as a whole, it should really have a new attitude towards the National Defense Force, and therefore that even these matters about equipping it and so on, there should be a kind of a national ownership of this. So I mean, we could have, as an executive, we could have taken all the decisions we needed about this, but we thought it was necessary to engage the South African public, including Parliament, as I said, so that indeed everybody gets a sense of ownership of this. In addition to which, of course, is a consideration that we would have to spend significant sums of money to purchase this equipment, that even that, the population generally had to take on board, having better understood what the South African National Defense Force, as opposed to the South African Defense Force, stood for, would do, and so on. And indeed, we're very pleased that that very inclusive process of consultation with the population came out with an outcome which said to us in government that indeed we'd managed to that extent to shift the attitude of the population towards the National Defense Force away from what the population would have known of the apartheid defense force, to understand that here you have a new entity consistent with this new South Africa. And that's what I would say, commissioners, in response to this question that's been posed.
And during the course of this public process that was undertaken, with the coming into power of the new government, there were also imperatives to address socio-economic rights. And what would your comment be with regard to the decision that was ultimately taken to procure the arms in the context of the debates that prevailed at the time regarding the socio-economic rights of the majority of the population?
Well, commissioners, again, as the commission would be aware, the country faced many different challenges, many different needs which needed to be addressed. There's none of them important demands, none of which could be postponed. You couldn't say there are challenges with regard to access to clean water. No, let's postpone acting on that until we've built more clinics. You couldn't. So here we've got a whole spread of challenges and things that to be done, which would have been reflected, for instance, in the Reconstruction and Development Program as was adopted by Cabinet. So this particular matter, which, as I was saying earlier, in terms of the Constitution certainly, and certainly of the needs that we knew would have to be addressed, that is the re-equipping of the Defense Force. This is one of the many matters with which government has got to deal. So in dealing with that issue, we had to see in how do we balance these expenditures on all sorts of things, expenditure on education, on health, on defense force, on the police, on all sorts of things. How do you balance this thing so that you achieve the best possible result with regard to advancing all of these objectives which we had to do? And I've been told, commissioners, that my colleague Trevor Manuel and people at Treasury have dealt in some detail with this particular matter. And I'm quite sure that I have absolutely nothing to add or subtract from what they have said. But one of the consequences of that is that we reduced quite sharply the expenditure on the defense as a proportion of GDP and of the budget. It may very well be, Commissioners, I'm not making this as a definitive statement. I haven't done any measurement. But looking at it now, at some retrospect, I think it may even be that we reduced it too radically. In the end, it will have a negative consequence on the National Defense Force, inevitably. But it was in order, Commissioners, to deal with the question that has been posed about how do we balance all of these needs, needs about economic development. Where do you get the money to invest in economic infrastructure? Social spending, foreign affairs, the country has got to reopen up to the rest of the world after all these years of isolation. How do you balance all of these things? I'm saying that balancing was done, and I'm quite sure that Trevor Manuel and the officials at Treasury have given a detailed account of how this was done and its outcome. And thank you very much, Commissioners.
So in essence, what this process or the decision was based on to acquire these armaments was also informed by the balancing act that was undertaken at the time, regard being had to government's policy of reconstruction and development. So that's basically it.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. That's it. Yeah.
And having regard to the need of the Defense Force, the South African Defense Force at the time, as described in the evidence of, amongst others, Admiral Green and the various other officials from the SANDF, there was in fact a dire need. The equipment had become obsolete and had to be replaced. So there was a need to deal with the matter as soon as possible without delay. Would you agree with that?
Yes, no, Commissioners, I would agree with that. I would say, for instance, effectively, for instance, we did not have a navy. You had sailors who were on the state payroll and so on, but no ships to sail in, which was why it was correct even for the previous government. The decision to acquire those 3 corvettes was correct in itself because they were needed, as was again confirmed by the Defense Review. So, I mean, the re-equipping of the National Defense Force was clear. It was obvious and logical. Thanks, Commissioners.
And also with regard to the envisaged acquisition, it is so that it was intended for the equipment to be acquired to be modern and be in line with the advancement in technology at the time that these decisions was made. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Commissioners.
And that is also a view that is expressed in the Defense Review, that in equipping the South African Defense Force, it was necessary to have modern equipment which would be or would enable those who operate it to be able to operate it elsewhere in the world other than the Republic in the event that that need therefore arose.
Yes, that would be correct, because I mean part of the kind of military policy that we're developing also included visualizing our contributing to peacekeeping efforts on the continent. So we had to be able to have that kind of outreach beyond the borders of the country. Thanks.
So, if one has regard again to what is stated in the last part of paragraph 1 to your statement, it is recorded there that the subcommittee of cabinet played a role in giving effect to the decisions of cabinet regarding the strategic defense procurement packages. What would you, in brief, describe these decisions of cabinet be with regard to the procurement of these packages, among others?
Well, commissioners, I mean, the first decision, of course, would have been that we must take the necessary steps to make sure that this equipment is acquired. And therefore, various structures would have been established to process this matter. I'm talking about structures below the ministerial committee, who would then look at the matter and then recommend to the ministerial committee. So one of the decisions would be that. There would have been other decisions like, for instance, a decision that says, let us look at affordability. Once you'd said, this is what we're going to get, which is a matter which the Treasury, Minister of Finance and Treasury would have dealt with, but they would have reported to the Ministerial Committee in the first instance. So Ministerial Committee would have to look at that to see whether what has come out of that is a matter that can properly be reported to Cabinet, would process it to that extent. I mean, I'm sure that that would have happened also with regard to the first reports of the negotiating team, which then had to negotiate final contracts with the preferred bidders, that Cabinet would have said, set up this thing and let it do whatever. And then the Ministerial Committee would have had oversight of the work of that negotiating team, so that by the time the report comes to Cabinet, it would have been processed by the Ministerial Committee. Thanks.
Now, we have already touched on your role as the chairperson of this interministerial committee, and you have testified that the various ministers who formed part of this committee were responsible for the functions in their respective divisions. For instance, the late Minister Joe Modise, as Minister of Defense at the time, would have been responsible for defense matters. Former Minister Manuel would be responsible for financial and treasury matters. Former Minister Erwin would have been responsible for issues relating to the national trade and industry, also regarding the industrial policy that had been developed by Cabinet at the time. Now, while these individual and respective ministers were responsible individually for their departments, is it so that as members of the IMC, they would discuss the matters relating to their respective departments jointly as members of the IMC and perhaps seek to reach consensus at that point?
Yeah. I should say, Commissioners, there was another member of the member of the IMC, that's the Minister of Public Enterprises, that we haven't mentioned. That's important because it relates to, for instance, your dips, because you are dealing with state corporations in the military defense sector. So I'm saying that we didn't mention the commissioner, that commissioners, the fact that we also had the Minister of Public Enterprises as member of the ministerial committee. Now, indeed, the particular matter of processing matters relevant to each ministry, of course, would first of all be done by the minister concerned, which report in the end would come as all other reports from the lower structures would then ultimately come to the ministerial committee as recommendations. So that's what would happen. And sure, as a ministerial committee, I'm quite sure that in instances where this might have been necessary, we would have had a look at ensuring that there is coherence. There is coherence in terms of the decisions that are being taken, affecting different departments and ministries.
And this, to an extent, is what the Constitution in Section 85 refers to as coordinating functions of Cabinet. You find that the late Minister Stella Sigcawu, as Minister of Public Enterprise at the time, would be looking at the impact that the procurement would have with regard to the defense industry. Minister Erwin would also have regard, together with his department, on the impact that would be achieved with the leveraging of industrial participation from the various bidders and so forth. Is that how this was intended to function?
Yes, certainly I would imagine that, yes, that's how the matter would have proceeded.
Now, if you turn to paragraph 4 of your statement, it appears on page 2 thereof. It is recorded there. This is after you have indicated that you, together with other members of the Interministerial Committee, had taken a decision to assist the Commission in every manner possible in the discharge of its functions. You record there at paragraph 4 that in that context it is important to make the point that none of the members of the IMC acted in their personal capacities when executing the functions as members of the executive. Could you just briefly expand on the import of what you say there?
Yes, Commissioners, I thought it was important to make this statement because you see a lot of, over the years, you've seen a lot of comment which seems to attribute particular actions, government actions, to individuals. Policies and actions, which is not how our government functioned. As I was saying that earlier, Commissioners, when you, as the Commission knows, when you talk about a defense white paper, which is tabled in Parliament by the Minister of Defense, it is in fact a cabinet document. It's a decision of cabinet, so the cabinet has discussed it and so on. So you could say in a colloquial sense that Minister of Defense has said, but it's only colloquial. So, and that's the point we're trying to make here. And therefore that the decisions that came from the Ministerial Committee were not decisions that were made by the members of the Ministerial Committee acting in their individual capacities. They had to report. Our senior committee was the cabinet. We were to report to the cabinet. This is what we're recommending and explain why they were recommending whatever. And the cabinet would then take a decision. So I thought it was important to understand this. I'm saying because you get this quite a lot, this rather strange notion that major decisions of government are taken by individuals. As though you have the capacity, the possibility to do a thing like that. At least nobody did when I was in government. Thanks.
And in that vein, that would also exclude you from having taken any particular decision regarding the SDPPs in your personal capacity, or in your capacity as president, or in your capacity as chairperson of the IMC.
Yes, commissioners, I mean, there are no decisions that were taken by the chair of the ministerial committee or the deputy president or the president of the country. There were no individual decisions that were taken with regard to this. All decisions, all the final decisions with regard to this matter were cabinet decisions.
You point out in paragraph 6 that the former ministers, your colleagues, have already given evidence to the Commission with regard to material issues that arose with regard to their participation in various decisions involving the SDPPs, and you say in paragraph 7 you endorse the evidence given in that respect. Do you still confirm that?
Yes, commissioners, I definitely do confirm that.
Now, once the decision to procure these packages had been taken, the implementation thereof was left to the various officials within the SAN Defence Force and the other departments that participated in the process. That process culminated in a cabinet, I beg your pardon, a briefing to the interministerial committee, which, according to the evidence before the Commission, took place on 31 August 1998, where a recommendation was adopted in terms of which certain equipment would be sourced from their recommended suppliers. Do you recall that?
No, commissioners, no, I don't recall this meeting. It would have taken place, we said 1998. That's what, how many years ago was that? 16 or something? No, I don't. Thanks.
In fact, to that effect, there is what appears to be a recordal of the proceedings of that meeting, and in respect of which Minister Casserols gave evidence as to what motivated the decision to procure some of the equipment from certain suppliers. And I believe you possibly would be aware of one controversial program in these packages, which was the acquisition of the Hawk from BAE. Do you have any recollection, vague or somewhat detailed, about this matter?
Well, commissioners, I would presume that both Ron Casserols, who at this time was Deputy Minister of Defense, and the officials and officers from the Defense Department and National Defense Force, I'm sure they would have addressed this matter. But as I recollect the discussion, when the recommendation came to the ministerial committee from the lower committees about this particular issue, a trainer. Now, this is a trainer for the Gripen. As I recall it, there was a proposal about two options. That the ministerial committee could agree to option 1 or it could agree to option 2. In terms of option 1, I think the Italian trainer was the preferred trainer in terms of option 1. And in terms of the second option, the hawk was. And the difference here was that what had to be decided really was the Italian trainer would be cheaper than the hawk. But the hawk would have certain advantages over the Italian in terms of compatibility with the Gripen. Therefore, from the point of view of training of pilots and whatever else the Air Force does, from that point of view, the Hawk was a better plane, but it was a more expensive plane. So, as Ministerial Committee were to take a decision in reality, which was, does cost trump this compatibility and other advantages? Or does compatibility and these other advantages trump cost? So a choice had to be made. and we decided that let us go with the Hawk. And then see how we manage the cost implications of that within the totality of the budget that would be allocated for this purpose. So I think that's the decision, not as I recall it. I would imagine that, as I was saying, the then Deputy Minister Castrils and officers from National Defense Force and officials from department might have a more detailed explanation about this. But I think broadly, commissioners, I think that was what the issue was, and that's how we arrived at a decision, which then, of course, was a decision, and that was then adopted finally by Cabinet.
And would you recall if there was any detailed presentation with regard to the costing of both these programs furnished to the Interministerial Committee at the time that it had to apply its mind to the recommendation coming from the lower committees?
Well, Commissioner, I don't know these matters about cost would obviously have featured in terms of the report coming from the committees below to say we had shortlisted the following whatever, and we think this one is best, this is number one, number two, and they would have explained on what basis this one becomes first and second. So to that extent, there would have been a discussion of the financial elements of that. But I would imagine that there would have been a much more extensive discussion of this matter once the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Finance, came with the affordability study, looking at the totality of the budget. I would imagine that might have been the occasion to have a more comprehensive discussion about the money matters. Thanks.
And perhaps for the assistance of the Commission, the issues relating to the choice of the Hawk and the affordability and rationale, the Commissioners would find in the transcript of proceedings at the following references: page 7187, lines 4 to 25. And with regard to affordability, these appear in the evidence again of former Minister Trevor Manuel at page 7188 as from line 4, and page 7198 as from line 1. It continues at page 7201, line 10 to 7203, line 22. That's where the detail of the affordability study and in relation to the acquisition of the entire package appears to have been dealt with in his evidence. And I believe these matters would have been canvassed during the meetings of the Interministerial Committee over which you presided.
Yes, that is correct, Commissioners.
There's an issue raised in paragraph 8 of your statement regarding the extensive litigation relevant to the issue around the validity of the contracts that were subsequently concluded and the affordability of the packages. As I recall through the evidence, again, of former Minister Manuel, that litigation involved you at that time having been cited in your capacity as the President of the Republic. Do you have any recollection independent of having refreshed your mind about it regarding that litigation?
No, Commissioners, I wouldn't. I mean, I recall indeed that, as has been stated, I was cited as the President in these instances, and indeed as government, we then decided that the Minister of Finance and Treasury would take the lead in terms of responding to this issue. So we didn't, therefore, deal with it in any direct and detailed sense. Thanks.
Now, having dealt with that matter, perhaps it might be appropriate to just digress, take a step or two back, that after the recommendations was made to the Interministerial Committee at the meeting in terms of which the evidence suggests was on 31 August 1998 to approve certain suppliers. This matter, is it correct, was considered by the Interministerial Committee, and it in turn made a recommendation to Cabinet, which then took a decision in principle to approve the recommendation that was made, and this was during in September 1998. Do you recall that? September 1999, I beg your pardon. Do you recall that?
Yes, Commissioners, the process was that, as I was saying, there would be committees below the Ministerial Committee that would look at all of these matters in the detail and then come and report to the Ministerial Committee and make recommendations to the Ministerial Committee, which would then discuss those prior to forwarding them to the Cabinet. So, sure, at some point, there would have been a time when the Ministerial Committee, having looked at the recommendations that would have come from the committees below, would then have gone to Cabinet and made various recommendations. And as I recall it, the Cabinet actually accepted the recommendations that were made by the Ministerial Committee. So I'm saying, Commissioners, I can't confirm the exact dates, whether the date was on the 9th of January or March or February or whatever. But at some point, the recommendations were made to the Ministerial Committee, including, which recommended all of these things, which ultimately became the decision of the Cabinet. There may very well have been this meeting which took place somewhere in Durban in 98. It may very well have happened. If it didn't happen, it would have happened. If it didn't happen then, it would have happened at some other point. But in the end, the fact of the matter is, Cabinet took certain decisions based on recommendations made by the IMC, which IMC itself would have listened to presentations made to it by other committees.
In fact, if you have regard to paragraph 9 of your statement, you state there that the record shows that in November 1998, Cabinet approved the preferred suppliers for each of the equipment types comprising the SDPP, and Cabinet simultaneously at that point requested that matters relating to affordability should be investigated. So in November 98, Cabinet took a decision with the caveat that the affordability of the packages be investigated.
Commissioners, yes, that is correct.
Now, it is common cause now, and through the evidence of former Minister Manuel, that the exercise relating to the investigation of the affordability was undertaken, and on the evidence before the Commission, a presentation thereof of the affordability study was made to the Interministerial Committee around September 1999. Do you have any recollection of that without the aid of any document at this point?
No, the only thing I can say, Commissioners, is that indeed there was a report presented, we discussed it, and then having satisfied ourselves that it had addressed what the Cabinet had said must be addressed, we took it back to Cabinet. What month that was, and so on, or even the detail of the discussion, I can't recall now.
Now, in paragraph 10, you state that when Cabinet was finally satisfied that it had attained an affordable contracting position that government could support, it took a decision in December 1999 in which it authorized the signing of the contracts with the successful suppliers. Do you recall that decision being taken by Cabinet?
Yes, Commissioners, I do. Indeed, this is a decision as is recorded here.
Could you just briefly set out the circumstances surrounding the decision being taken, if you recall?
Well, Commissioner, I'm not quite sure that I understand that question, but I mean, this is a culmination of a process. A decision having been taken, National Defense Force needs re-equipping, and go through a process to say this is how it needs to be re-equipped, and then pose the question, is it affordable? At the end of all of that process, a Cabinet in December 99 said, well, all of these matters have been addressed, and in terms of the negotiations with the preferred bidders, what we required needed to be done with those preferred bidders in terms of the negotiations has been done, and therefore we can now proceed to sign the contracts with the successful suppliers. So I'm saying really, I think, Commission, it really just represents a culmination of this process which started quite earlier when these various decisions were taken to do this procurement.
Now, in paragraph 11 of your statement, you state that you have at all times held the firm conviction that the decisions of Cabinet, I presume this is in relation to the SDPP, were compliant with the Constitution and within the constitutional mandates conferred on Cabinet. Why was it necessary to include this statement, or this assertion in your statement?
Well, Commissioners, I'm saying this because there are some matters that have been in the public domain for some time, some of which have suggested that there was something wrong, even probably constitutionally wrong, in terms of a government deciding to go for this requisition in the light of the various demands that the country has for houses and this and that and the other. To make the point that people shouldn't cherry pick what the Constitution says. It requires a defense force of a particular kind. It describes it, as the Commission knows, the task of this defense force. So, so to that extent, I'm saying that the decisions taken by government were compliant with the Constitution. And it also relates to matters that belong within the mandate of the National Executive, as defined in the Constitution. Because again, I've heard that there's been some argument presented that once the cabinet had agreed on all of these things, the affordability issue and so on, it needed to go to Parliament to have that endorsed. It's clearly wrong. What happens is that the budget, national budget, as I'm sure the Commission is perfectly aware, national budget is approved by Parliament. What would have happened in this particular case is that all costs that government incurs, as this one, must be provided for. There must be necessary funds have to be found. Those funds have to be approved by the national parliament. So that matter, therefore, would have gone to Parliament via that national budget. The funds that would be allocated to finance this acquisition. Not that if Cabinet wants to buy 20 chairs, it must go to Cabinet to Parliament to get permission to acquire 20 chairs. There's no such requirement. But that purchase, in terms of the national budget, must reflect. So, and that's why we're making these references to these constitutional matters, because, as I say, because of some things which somehow have been put in the public domain, seeming to suggest that somehow the government had acted in a manner that was unconstitutional. Thanks.
Now, you would have seen that that brought us to the conclusion of your statement, as I understand it. Is there anything else with regard to the role that you played, either as Deputy President of the Republic, or President of the Republic, or the Chairperson of the IMC, in relation to the acquisition of the packages that you would like to add, which is not included in your statement?
No, Commissioners, I can't think of anything. I think we've said whatever needed to be said, but of course, the Commission may want to ask some further questions. I don't know. We'll be available to answer those. Thanks.
Chair and Commissioner Musi, that is the evidence in chief of the President Mbeki.
Thank you, Advocate